Okay, the mixer brush. So this is where a lot of the fun and experimentation also comes in, but we need to be careful with it as it can get out of hand and the effect it creates can become too much kind of too quickly. So like the liquefied tool, we want to use it intentionally. So what is the mixer brush tool? Well, there's another checkpoint here that's going to give you a better breakdown of everything that it is, but essentially you can think of it as the Photoshop simulated version of what an actual paintbrush with paint and water and a canvas, kind of how it would work in real life. So if you think of a paintbrush and a canvas, uh, watercolor, think of watercolor, you have a wet canvas, you have wet paper, and that's what wet refers to here, how wet this canvas is or your document. If your canvas is more wet and then you use your paint brush, right here is your paintbrush, depending on what color it is, and you can click in here and choose different colors. Right, so now I have red that's essentially going to mix with all of these colors in here that I have on my canvas because I've told Photoshop with this wet here to consider when using my mixer brush to consider that this is an entirely wet canvas, which means these colors are going to mix very well with the red paintbrush color that I have here. And just like a real paintbrush, right, you can, well, I'll go over this more in class, um, but you can load the paintbrush after each click with the color of your paint, and you can clean the brush after each stroke as well. I guess I'll just kind of go over here. So what does load means? Load means, just like a real paintbrush, you're dipping it back into your paint and you're loading it up with more paint. In this case, whatever color you have here in your box. And clean, what does this one here, clean the brush after each stroke? Well, whenever you're using a paintbrush in real life, you might get some red and paint a little bit and then decide, okay, I need to paint some more, but my brush is kind of dirty and that it's now mixed with all of these other colors and it's kind of like a brownish color and I need to get that original, just pure red back. Well, that's what clean the brush means. In real life, you would dip it into water until all of the muddy mixed colors are gone and you have a clean brush again. But in Photoshop, you can just click this button down and after every time I click, that's telling Photoshop clean the brush, go back to original red so that all of your mixing is good and nothing kind of becomes muddy, so to speak. And that's what load means. This is how much of the paint, i.e. the red here, I'm going to load into my paintbrush, into my mixer brush after each time I'm clicking and painting with it. We want 100% for this project. We want 100% wet as well so that we get some really good mixing. We mix refers to how much I want the paintbrush to mix with the colors on the canvas. We want it to mix 100% with the colors on the canvas. And flow, if you remember many times in class I've gone over what flow is. It's related to opacity, so I won't repeat myself there. And the other thing is we need to set up this workspace first. So that was just a quick rundown on what this mixer brush settings are up here. First we want to do is click on this little caret. We want to clean our brush. You can choose a color if you like. I'm going to go ahead and start with a completely empty brush. And then over here in our layers panel, we have this work. We're going to go ahead and duplicate it. So I'm going to hit Command J. I can hide this now. I'm going to rasterize this work that I've done. I don't need it as a smart object anymore. I want to be able to use the mixer brush on top of the smart objects. That's why I got to rasterize this layer. And I have this as backup. It's always good to have backups in your work process. Next thing is now, if you recall, when we were initially doing the smudge tool, we used a gradient map and we set it to saturation. We're going to do something similar here, but for this technique, we want to do a hue and saturation adjustment layer. we want to take the saturation slider all the way to the right. And this slider, just go a little bit either to the right or to the left. I'm going to go ahead and just go a little bit to the right. Just do one click, and that's good. Keep it at the normal blend mode. But again, just make sure that saturation slider is all the way to the right. Now, next, I need to create a new layer in between my hue and saturation and the layer 1 here. And be sure, I'm doing this quickly, name each one of these layers. So I'm going to go ahead and name this one Mixer Brush. This one before it was where I did a liquefy to it. I can keep that as fuel, and I'll call it smudge. Be sure to name your layers as you're working through this, because you're going to be duplicating layers, creating composites. So be sure to name them. Okay, so I'm going to create my new layer here. New layer. I'm going to name this the Mixer Brush, because on this new layer is where I'm going to be doing all of my Mixer Brush stuff. So I'm going to have my Mixer Brush selected here. I'm going to clean my Mixer Brush. Make sure, again, all samples are selected. So it is going to sample from all of these layers that are active. And this is the one you need to be careful with. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. You want to kind of do clicks a little bit. I'm going to do this. It's going to kind of mess up the type a little bit, kind of create a cool effect there for that. All right, so let me show you. If I click now and just keep holding it down, you'll see how quickly it's going to get out of hand. So not too bad, but if I just keep going over it, right, it's just kind of creating a mess. So this is something to use very intentionally. Sometimes you can just do clicks and kind of build it up. I'm going to click, and I'm moving my mouse just a little bit. And I don't necessarily want to do this all over. Again, this is experimental. Do a little bit, and if you end up not liking it, hit Command Z. Now the real effect of this is going to be at the end when we add our gradient map on top of it. And you'll see why we had to do a hue and saturation layer, and why we had to do this gradient map with all these different colors once we get that gradient map going. So I'm going to mess around here and try and create something that I like. So a lot of going with it and hitting Command Z if you kind of create something you don't really like. A lot of experimenting here. And kind of warp the letters as well. I'm going to go ahead and do it on the side. Create some interesting colors in the composition there. And right, you can always create another one, right? So for instance, say I like this, but maybe I want to come back to this, and I want to keep experimenting. Hit Command J, all right, and just hide this one and keep working and doing your experimenting with this one. Because if you mess up and you go too far, all right, you can always just delete it and go back to this Mixer Brush here. Or if the gradient map you wind up putting on it just doesn't look too cool, again, you can always go back. So I'm going to delete that, create another copy, and keep working, because I ended up not really liking it. I don't think I'm going to do too much. All right, and I can always do a little bit on this and then go into my, well, let me do a little bit more here first. I don't like that. That's pretty cool. Okay. Let's see what goes on here. Get some colors going on there. And I'm holding down my click, and as you hold it down, you see the colors, they kind of morph and change into this rainbow effect. I'm going to Command Z. I like that look better. So I think I've got something going on here I don't want to mess around too much with. So I'm going to duplicate this layer again one more time. Actually, before I do that, you know what? I'm going to click at the top, and what we want to do here is, I think I want to do the liquefy to this a little bit more. So I'm going to hit Shift Alt Command E to create my composite. I could turn these off. And I'm going to turn this into a smart object. Filter, liquefy. And I'm going to mess with this a little bit more here in the liquefy panel. Pull some of these colors out. And not too much. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to hit OK. All right, so the end part of using the mixer brush is to now mess around with our gradient map. So we're going to click here. I'm going to clip it to what I have going on here and start adding colors and trying to create an interesting looking composition here color-wise. As you can see now, the idea, I have a bunch of fuel that kind of makes sense with the fire. The good part about this is what, and the reason why when we initially did our gradient map, if you recall, let me click, I'll hit OK for right there. If you recall, we did all of these colors, these different colors, is that now we have a very wide spectrum, right? Because if you remember, the gradient map is mapping the colors you choose to, you know, this spectrum, the darks and the lights and the midtones in between. So we created a lot of different colors in there that now we have a lot to work with for creating an interesting looking gradient map. So another stage of experimenting, create one gradient map and then go to your blend mode and cycle through some of these blend modes, see if one of them creates an even more interesting look. Sometimes it will. Another thing you can do is duplicate that gradient map. You can already see it already changed the way it looked, and you can always see what cycling through this time the blend modes will do. Or you can change this, you can add another gradient map here. Turn this one off. That one looks pretty cool. But I can always see, all right, go through here again. Maybe blend modes on this gradient map. I'm already liking that. The darken. That looks pretty cool. Sometimes adding multiple gradient maps on top of each other and then messing around with the blend modes can also create interesting effects. So say, let's do that one. I did that. I can always even try a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Mess around with this slider now and see if it creates another combination that I like even more. And then on that one, let's do it right there. On this one too, I can go again, see what happens if I cycle through. So that's pretty cool. I like that color, those color schemes there. A lot of this is very experimental, trial and error, and you land on some pretty cool, interesting things throughout this process. So where's that one I liked? There we go. Okay, so that is it for this. Do a lot of experimenting. Arrive at something that looks cool.